Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wasatch Reading Club. I am so glad that you're here today. Today's video is going to be geared more towards middle school, junior high, or high school students. So if you're a student, you found it. This is the thing that will hopefully help you understand how a story works and why your teacher cares so much. Okay, so you might have most of this down. You might need a little bit of extra help with how a story works. Why do we need to decode stories? Why does it matter what's going on in a story? When it comes to close reading and deciphering or decoding what's happening in a story, it's super important to be able to break down information. And this is important in fiction, but it's also important in nonfiction. And oftentimes it's more fun to just do it in a story or to do it in a book, a novel, something that's kind of interesting to read. We can see a pattern as we read through things, and that becomes sort of a framework for us to understand what's happening in a story. So if you've seen this image of the story arc or how a story is laid out, this should look familiar to you. If it doesn't, here it is. You can see it. There's lots of versions out there. The way that a story is broken down, and this is almost always the case, is at the very, very beginning, we learn a little bit about the character, the main character, where they're at, what they want, and why they can't get it yet, or what it's going to take for them to accomplish what they're looking for. The beginning part of this story is called the exposition. And that's where we learn the setting. That's where things are happening or what time period things are happening, whether it's day or night, wherever the story is taking place, whether it's dark and scary and maybe it's stormy, or whether it's paradise-like and wonderful and beautiful. The setting is where the story takes place. We also learn about the character, what the character wants, maybe some of the character's flaws, and this sets up the story. What the character wants is usually a conflict. There's something stopping the main character from getting what they want. And then, as they go away from the exposition, the beginning of the story, we get into what's called the rising action. The rising action is all of the stuff that takes place that kind of gets in the way of the main character getting what they want. So if they're on a long quest, they might come across some bad guys, or maybe they'll find a dragon, or maybe there'll be some people that steal something from them. All stories have things that try to get in the way, stop the main character from getting what they want. That rising action is little problems, and as the main character, all the characters go through these little problems, they're forced to deal with it, and then things are okay. And then they make some progress, and then they're forced to deal with something, and then it's okay. And that rising action isn't just a straight line up all the time. Oftentimes it's kind of jagged because there's some learning and there's an achievement, and then there's more challenge or hardship, and then there's an achievement. And then at the very top of this rising action is the big thing. This is where you're on the edge of your seat in the movie and you're biting your fingernails or you're eating the popcorn and you can't wait to find out what happens next. And hopefully they don't open the door, or whatever it is, whether it's a horror movie or a fantasy movie or an action movie. This is the most intense part where you can't help but scream, "What are you doing?" The climax is where the main character finally has this challenge. It's the final boss fight. It's the final test to see if they're worthy to get what they want. That climax, sometimes if it's a series of stories, it could be the ending of the movie or the story or the book, because there's another story coming, depending on how they've produced the story. I'm thinking of The Hobbit, for example. The Hobbit is a book by itself, but has been made into 3 live-action movies, and so it has a lot of rising action and kind of climax, and then the thing that happens after the climax is the falling action, and this is where things sort of calm down. If you've seen The Hobbit, or if you've read the story of The Hobbit, if you haven't read it, I really recommend it. The falling action from The Hobbit is after, without spoiling it, there's a major boss fight, and Bilbo and Gandalf resetting their lives. They're heading back home, and that's the falling action and the resolution, and some things happen when Bilbo gets back to his house in the Shire. But that's the conclusion. That's when things wrap up. That's when things become normal. And the main character has gone through this journey and changed and accomplished something, and then seen some reward or result as of their sacrifice. So that's the main story arc. That's how things play out in a lot of stories. And that can be applied to all genres of fiction. That can be seen in movies, that can be seen in plays, that can be seen in books, that can be seen in short stories. And the speed, how fast it takes place is obviously different for everyone. Okay, so your teacher wants you to understand how a story is laid out. Your teacher wants to know that you can see the exposition, you know what the setting is, you know what's going on with the character, you know what they want, you have an idea of predicting what might happen. Some of the other things that your teacher wants you to know is figurative language. Figurative language is a big deal because we can see things like hyperbole, simile, metaphor, onomatopoeia, interjection, personification, alliteration, and all of those things are important because an author will use those things to tell a story, but we have to know whether or not he's being serious or whether or not the character that is, experiencing the story is really experiencing something, or if they're really frustrated with something. We use it every day in our language. An example of a hyperbole would be something that is obviously not possible, like in the middle of July, August, in the Midwest, where you're not close to the coast. It can be hot. It can be as hot as the sun. Now, it's not really as hot as the sun, because if it were, we'd be dying. We'd be melting. It'd be so awful. But it really does feel like, if you've ever been to the South, Orlando, Arkansas, Louisiana, in August, it's pretty miserable. It's hot, it's humid. Anywhere that has a lot of heat in the central, in other parts of the world, it's the same way. And sometimes it's cold too. Hyperbole could be, I was so cold, my eyes were freezing, or whatever the example is. A hyperbole is an exaggeration. It felt like it was something that's, a hyperbole is an exaggeration. Something that's not really possible. For example, if your lips were stuck to something frozen and you wanted to pull them off and it felt like they stretched like a rubber band. Our lips don't really stretch like a rubber band, but maybe it feels like it, or maybe that's what the author wants us to see. So the authors use figurative language to help us understand what's happening in the story. We can imagine it in our mind. We can picture it. We can pretend that, or maybe we've had a similar experience and we can connect with that. So figurative language: hyperbole, simile, metaphor, onomatopoeia, interjection, personification, and alliteration. All of those things are important for you to know. Check out those words. Your teacher wants you to know these things. Your teacher wants to know that you can break these things down, find the deeper meaning, make some connections to other books that you've read, make some connections to yourself, and ultimately that will help you in solving problems. Ultimately that will help you in other things that you read, other things that you learn, other things that you do in your life that requires some thinking, that requires some critical thought, that requires you to dig a little bit deeper and find out what's going on. I hope this was helpful for you today. It's kind of a dry thing maybe. Hopefully you learned something from it. Hopefully you can use this. Go back and impress your teacher. Know that you understand what they're trying to teach you, what the teacher is trying to say, and that you're learning something from them. Have a great day. Thanks for stopping by. If this video was great, like it and subscribe. And if there's something else that you'd like to know about why we need to read these stories, why we need to decode these things, how a story works, leave a comment. I'd love to talk with you about it. Have a great day.
Step at a time, as long as